Good morning. It's Miss Pam, and today we're going to do a science experiment. We will follow the scientific method. Okay, so the first thing in the scientific method is a question. So our question today is, do these items that you see down here, do they sink or float? Okay. The second thing that we're going to do is we gather information. So we look at our items a little bit closer. We try to determine if you think they will sink or float. And then we make a hypothesis, which is we're going to predict whether we think they will sink or float. Okay? So let's do that now. A pair of scissors. Okay? Pair of scissors. I want you to predict whether you think they will sink or float. I'm going to predict that I think they're going to sink, okay? Because they seem like they'd be pretty heavy, and I think they'll sink. All right, next is an ice cube. So I think, and you need to make a prediction too, I think an ice cube I think it'll sink as well. Okay? All right. Now, next is a leaf. Okay? Do we think a leaf will sink or float? I think a leaf is pretty lightweight. So I think it's going to float on top of the water. Okay? Next is a hammer. Okay? Do we think a hammer is going to sink or float? Okay, I think the hammer is going to sink. Okay? You need to be making predictions too, okay? Now, next is a paper clip. Okay, a paper clip. Do we think it'll sink or float? I think a paper clip's really tiny and it's really lightweight, so I think I'm going to pick float. All right, I predict that a paper clip will float. All right, next is a feather, okay? Well, we know feathers are light, okay? So light as a feather, right? I think a feather will float, okay? Next, we have a fork, okay? Do you think a fork will sink or float? Make a prediction. I think the fork is going to sink. Okay? All right. And the last one is a bouncy ball. What do you think about a bouncy ball? Do you think it's going to sink or float? Well, look, there's a ball. It's floating on top of the water. I think I'm going to predict that a bouncy ball will float. Okay? So we have under sink, we have scissors, ice cube, hammer, and fork. That's my prediction. Float, I've got feather, bouncy ball, leaf, and paper clip. Those are my predictions, okay? Now, to actually do the experiment, we're going to meet my granddaughter, Macy. She's going to help us with putting these objects in the water. And as you can see here, we have everything that we had pictures of. We have an ice cube. We have a hammer. We have a feather and a bouncy ball and a pair of scissors and a fork and a paper clip and a leaf. Okay? So we're going to get started. Macy's going to help us. So Macy, let's start out with the hammer. Let's start with the hammer. Okay? Go ahead and drop it in. Wow. Did the hammer sink or float? What happened, Macy?
It sunk.
It sunk. Yes, it went straight to the bottom, didn't it? I predicted that the hammer would sink. So far, I got that one right. Did you? All right, next, let's try the fork, Macy. All right, go ahead and drop it.
Got in my face.
What happened to the fork besides splattering yourself?
It sunk.
It sunk. All right. I also had put that a fork would sink. So, all right. Doing good. All right, let's try the feather. Okay. I predicted the feather would float. Let's see what happens when Macy drops the feather in the water. It is floating. Awesome. Okay, let's try the bouncy ball. I said the bouncy ball would float. Go ahead and drop it in the water, Macy. What happened, Macy?
It sunk.
It sunk. I thought it was going to float. What did you think? Okay, I said the bouncy ball would float, and it actually sunk. Let's do the ice. And whoa, what happened with the ice, Macy?
It is floating.
It is floating, and I had said that I predicted the ice would sink, and it's floating. All right, let's do the paper clip. Okay, go ahead and drop it in. Now, I said the paper clip would float because it seems so lightweight. I don't know if you can see it down there in the bottom, but it sank right to the bottom, didn't it, Macy?
Yep.
Sure did. All right. What about the scissors? Did we say float or sink? I said sink. All right, go ahead, Macy. Put them in. All right, what happened to the scissors, Macy?
They sunk.
They sunk, okay. We've got one more, right? The leaf. Do you think the leaf is going to float or sink? What did you predict? I predicted the leaf was going to float. All right, let's see what happens, Macy. Awesome. Okay, so the leaf is floating. All right, so all of this, all these objects that you see here, everything, everywhere is made up of particles. And particles and density is something that Macy's going to explain to us about.
Okay. Density is where all the particles in an object are hugging together tightly. That makes the object sink, when you put it in water. And when they float, their particles are more loosely hugging.
Okay, so what you're saying is that it doesn't have anything to do with how big the object is or how heavy we think it is. It has to do with the particles that make up the object. That's what makes it dense and sink, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, so the word density is what makes an item sink to the bottom, okay? So, in conclusion, we're going to move back over here to the board. All right. Did scissors sink? Yes, the scissors did. What about the hammer? Ooh, straight to the bottom, didn't it? It went straight to the bottom. How about the ice cube? Well, my prediction was incorrect. The ice cube actually is floating. So I'm going to move it down here. All right. What about the fork? The fork sank. So my prediction was correct. All right. So let's move over to the float side. Did the feather float? Yes. Did the leaf float? Yes. Did the bouncy ball float? Oh, the bouncy ball sank all the way to the bottom. And we moved the ice cube over, but what about the paper clip? Did the paper clip float? No, the paper clip sunk to the bottom. Right? So in conclusion, we said these items sunk, our experiment showed us that the scissors, the bouncy ball, the hammer, the fork, and the paper clip all sank to the bottom. The feather, the ice cube, and the leaf all floated on top. So these items, their density is more And that's what makes them sink than the ones that float, okay? Their particles are loose. So we're going to try one more thing here really quickly. All right, Macy, I want you to get that bouncy ball and put it back in the water. Okay, what happened to that bouncy ball?
It sunk.
It sunk. Now try this bouncy ball. What happened with it?
It floats.
It's floating. So what does that tell us, Macy?
Tells us that this one is more dense than this one.
Right. So the particles in the little bouncy ball are hugging very tightly, and the particles in the bigger bouncy ball are more loose, and it makes it float. Okay? All right. Good job, guys. Y'all can do this at home, but be sure and get Mom and Dad to help. Okay? Talk to you soon. Bye.